Good afternoon. In last two chapters, we know about what is demand, what is supply, elasticity of demand, elasticity of supply, then the demand and supply, how helpful for the determination of price, equilibrium output, and also the rationing and allocation of scarce goods, minimum wage legislation, and all arbitrage. Today, we discuss about consumers' behavior. We know that all the economic activities based on the consumer behavior. Consumer behavior has always been a subject of curiosity and research because nowadays it is a internet age. Here, the consumer can consume with global markets. Consumer can identify the product with internet base, so that the increased internet has changed the concept of market. Business are increasingly talking about value creation rather than mere product creation. It is very important for economists, the value creation, not product creation. So that the concept of value creation is based on concept of utility. Utility, what is utility? Utility is utility different from person to person. That the concept of utility has become extremely is guiding marketing team across the globe, is designing business and marketing the company in a way that is likely to attract the maximum number of customers and maximize sales revenue because of the utility. So utility is important for the consumers. In study of the consumer behavior, the utility is basic thing. Utility is the basis of consumer demand. Consumer demand a product. Why the consumer demand a product? Because of utility. If the product has not any utility, then the consumer never demand the product. The consumers demand the concept of market interaction between consumer and producer has evolved in present times because of the every product has a utility. If some suppose example, a vegetarian has no utility about meat because meat is not useful for him, so it never demands that product. So a consumer is more informed about the choice available to him, and someone somewhere is trying to produce a good and services for to the to provide utility to the customer. So nowadays, the present time, the business are successful because they provide high utility to their customers. So those business are successful who provide high utility to their customers. Then what is utility? Utility is a psychological thing. It is a mental base. It is a feeling of satisfaction, pleasure, or well-being experienced by the consumer from the consumption of that particular good or services. If it is not satisfied for that good, then it is not for him, that good is not giving the utility. So that it is a subjective concept. Level of utility derived from a product different from person to person, and from like example, meat has no utility for a vegetarians, and liquor is no utility for normal people like that. Utility of a product can be evaluated in the sense that there's one satisfying power is in it. They are in the commodity, there is one satisfaction power, so that the product has utility. Like, for example, pen has its own utility, whether a person can read or can write or not. However, utility considered a subjective in consumer. analysis, because a consumer will demand a good only if that good holds utility for her. If there is if the good is not give no utility, then the consumer cannot demand that good. Utility not only varies from person to person, but also from time to time at a different level of consumption and at different modes of the consumption consumers. So the most basic example of to understand the concept is food. Food. Food is the most best example for the for the for know the utility. If a person is not hungry, even her favorite food will not have will give him, then there is no utility for him at that time, at that moment. So utility is different from person to person. Utilities differ from time to time, and and a different level of consumption and different modes of the consumption. So it really based on a psychological phenomenon, and it based on the consumer's choice. Marketing concepts have also evolved over the time. Advertisers target now consumers on the basis of their past purchases, interest, likes, dislikes, sites they visit. Because of now, the customers often offer customized coupons for the product or service that might hold utility for them. Then consumers can be attracted by products in this way. They target now consumers who are purchased the past that product, and their interest, their likes, their dislikes, this which sites they visit, like that, and their mood, and then can they decide, then they decide to product a good. Then what is the relationship between want, utility, consumption and satisfaction? We know that want, the consumer want a good because the want is a want means it is the understanding of a consumer behavior. A consumer selects a commodity based on its want, because want which good, if which good want satisfied, that good can consumer demand. Consumption of the commodity leads to satisfaction of wants. Then when consumer consumes that good, that give him some satisfaction. Thus, want, utility, consumption and satisfaction are interrelated with each other. Want means selection of a commodity, consumption of and consumption of commodity, then getting utility in the sense of satisfaction of the want. From the want, the consumer gets some utility. So that utility has basic points. Utility means utility is the one satisfaction power of a commodity, and utility varies from person to person. It is different from person to person. It varies from time to time also, at different level of consumption and at a different moods of a consumer. It is varies. Then there is utility is three concepts. Mainly there is three concepts of utility: initial utility, total utility, and marginal utility. Initial utility. What is initial utility? The utility derived from the first unit of a commodity is called initial utility. When the consumer get when consume the good in first initial utility always more than the always total number of units of a commodity consumed by her is called total utility. From that, it is the unit of utility. The units of consume, that is what the that is total utility. Then marginal utility. Marginal utility, it means addition made to total utility by consuming an additional unit. When a consumer consume an additional unit, then what amount it gets from addition gets to total utility, that is called marginal utility. And suppose the consumer consume 10 utility, 10 units of utility, then what total utility of 10, 10 units started. In page number 92, we see the relation between total utility and marginal utility through a schedule and from a graph. In this schedule, you saw the number of units 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units, and total utility you saw and marginal utility. How calculate marginal utility on this basis? If the total in when you consume 1 unit, then you get total utility 6, and also marginal utility also 6. When you consume 2 units, you get the marginal utility up to 2 units, 10 minus marginal utility of total utility of first unit 6, then you get the 4, that is marginal utility of second utility is 10. When you minus them 12 to minus 10, then we get the marginal utility 2. Like this way we calculate marginal utility. Marginal utility is find the like this way. Then in the diagram we saw that there is, so in O axis marginal utility and total utility is measured. In O Y axis we measure units of commodity. And when you consume, when the consumer consume first unit, he gets total utility 6 and also marginal utility 6. And in case of second unit of good he consumed, then he get the marginal utility 4 but total utility 10. In unit 3 he get the total utility 12 and marginal utility 2. And in the 4 unit we see that here total utility 12 but marginal utility 0. Here we point out one point that when marginal utility is total utility is decreasing in diminishing rate, but never it negative. But marginal utility is after zero, minimum point. When marginal utility is zero, they are the total utility is highest, and after that point, it it's negative. This is also called diminishing marginal utility, which is discussed further. Here we just know about how we calculate. We know that when there is much food, take example. When you consume one rasgulla, we get highest amount of total utility more. Then two unit of rasgulla, then that is also give you more utility, total utility. In case of three also more. But where you get four, that there we find that utility is total utility is decreasing, because that time in 4 unit we do not want to take much more rasgulla, because that give you a negative effect. Means health problem or momenting, and like that some problems are created. So at that time the marginal utility is, if you calculate marginal utility, that is negative, but total utility is decreasing, but decreasing, diminishing in nature, and that is called total utility decreasing in nature, and marginal utility is diminishing in nature. So like this way you can calculate the marginal utility and total utility. Then measurement of utility. But we know that from starting we know that it is a cyclical phenomenon. Besides this, they some economists calculate it as a cardinal utility, means quantitatively. According to them, a person can express utility or satisfaction derived from the goods in the quantitative cardinal terms. So, in this case, the person can say that he derives utility equal to 10 utils from the consumption of a unit of good A. Measured through a cardinally, means in one, two, or quantitatively in manner. But after some, according to Marshall, marginal utility is actually measurable in terms of money, and money is the measuring rod of utility. Utility, how measure utility? Utility measure in terms of money, and money is the measuring rod of utility. As such, but Hicks and Allen, they both are two economists who criticize this manner, because it is a psychological thing. The utility is psychological thing. It cannot be measured in quantitative manner. So Hicks and Allen then compare a new utility, describe the new utility, that is ordinal concept of utility. These two economists are modern economists. They describe the utility qualitatively. These things are we covering next chapter or next day. Now we know that in Marshall, this utility, the diminishing marginal utility concept of Marshall, and Marshall is measuring it in terms of money, and money is the measuring rod of utility. Then one of the basic question arises in microeconomics. There is a number of commodity or things are provided by the economy producer, but consumer has a income is limited. Then how can it buy? The decision about which good or services to buy, it is a critical concept. So consumer behavior has gained great relevance today, and companies are spending huge amount to understand consumer preference, so that consumer preference cannot be understood by easily, because the consumer has limited income, and there is so many things to buy on this limited income. So businessmen are understand about the consumer's preference, which preference are given and which is the best for the consumer. For that, he can be understanding about the consumer behavior. But now, since the world is more connected than ever through internet, consumers have large number of options. Nowadays, there is large number of options. It has become imperative for consumption to companies to analyze consumer choices, then preparations, designs their goods and services. They first understand the consumer's behavior. Then can he prepare their understand the consumer's behavior. Then can he design their goods and services according to their preference. And consumer behavior is understood by some things. First, consumer's preference. Economists are say to understand the consumer behavior, it is important that first study about the consumer's behavior and consumer's preference. Uh, but this can be done graphically or algebraically also. Consumer's preference can be done graphically or algebraically. Behavior is based on the preference. The consumer's behavior is based on the preference. What is likes or what is dislikes for the consumers. That it is important to identify what gives value to the consumer. We live in an information age, so companies follow their customers online, keep a track of sites they visit, products they buy extra in order to identify their preference. Then can they use, they can produce things. So nowadays social networking sites are very important to study the consumer's preference or identify the consumer's preference. Then budget consideration. Budget, it is also an important aspect. Prices of goods and paying capacity of consumer has strong influence on his behavior because the consumer's income is limited. In limited income, he can buy many goods. Through online tracking, companies today are not only able to identify consumer preference, but also they are paying capacity and budget construction. Means in nowadays in this social networking age, the companies not only study about their preference, but also they can know about their budget construction, and through this way he can produce like those goods which are prepared by the consumers. And also the government producers give them additional discounts, sometimes cashback schemes, EMI options, which attract the consumers to for their products. Then consumers choice. To understand consumers' behavior, it is very important step, consumer choice. Given preference and limited income, consumer chooses the combination of goods which give him maximum satisfaction. We know that consumer is prefer that product which give him maximum satisfaction. But in reality, there is not available only one good. There is available many types of goods. Among them, the which combination is best for him and which is give him maximum satisfaction is depend on their limited income and preference. With markets becoming global, consumers have large number of choices available these days. Final demand for a good will be dependent on combination of factors. These their preference, value offered by the product and budget constitution. So final combination of the factors given by the producer, it depends of the consumer's preference, what value they offered, and the budget of the consumer. So due to this preference, economist analysis of this preference can helpful for the producer to product that commodity. Then assumption of consumer preference. Why consumer preference have some conditions? In which conditions consumer preference is continue or working? The theory of consumer behavior is based on consumption preference. For better understanding of consumer behavior with the help of consumer preference, economists usually make following assumptions. Some assumptions are made by economists about the consumer preference. First, completeness. Preferences are assumed to be complete. Any two different bundles of goods can be compared. A consumer either prepare one basket over other, or it is different between two baskets, indifferent between two baskets. So, he can the conjugal can indifferent between two and prepare they which give him the maximum satisfaction among between the two. Then transitivity. Transitivity means if a consumer prefers X over Y or Y over Z, then the consumer must be prepared Z X over Z also. This is transitivity. Transitivity is a necessary assumption to answer consumer constituency. More is always preferred over less. We know that consumer is always want more, and consumer is rational. He and always knows that greater utility can be derived by consuming more quantity of the commodity, so that he always prepare more over than less. These are some conditions, assumption of consumer preference. To describe the cardinal utility analysis, it is very important that to know about the conditions and about the preference of the consumers. Cardinal utility analysis. It is a Marshallian concept and it is a quantitative concept. In this case, the utility is a measurable and quantifiable entity. According to cardinal utility approach, if a person is drinking a glass of water, it will be possible for him to assign some numerical value like 10 utils or 20 utils to the utility derived from it. But we know that the utility is a psychological phenomenon. Besides this, the cardinal utility analysis, the utility can be measured in numerically. And this analysis also based on conditions or assumptions. First, the cardinal measurement of utility. Utility of any commodity can be measured in its units called utils. When you measure in cardinal analysis, we think that is all the utility is measured in utils. Then utilities are additive. Total utility can be calculated by measuring utility derived from all the units of a commodity consumed. What is the total units of consumed? Then can you derive the total utility. Utility is independent. That means not related to the amounts of other commodity purchased by the consumer. Means the utility is not affected by if the what amount of other commodity is purchased by the consumer. It is unaffected by utility of other individuals. The marginal utility of money remains constant. In this, we know that so marginal utility is decreasing or diminishing in nature, but in this concept, it is derived that describe that marginal utility of money remains constant. When a person purchases more of good, the amount of money diminishes and marginal utility of remaining money may increase. But in this approach, marginal utility of money is treated constant. It is not changes when the consumer can purchase more of good. The amount of money diminishes, but marginal utility of remaining money may increase. But in case it is constant in nature. With the help of this, we can now know about law of diminishing marginal utility. It is a most important fundamental of utility analysis. Law of diminishing, we know that marginal utility is diminishing in nature, and it is then with the help of these three conditions, we now describe the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility describes the relations between utility and quantity of a commodity. This law states that after sufficient quantity of commodity is consumed, the utility derived from each successive unit decreases. Consumption of all other commodities remaining same. That means in this law, the after sufficient quantity of a commodity is consumed, when the consumer consumes sufficient quantity of a commodity, the utility after that the utility derived from each successive unit, the additional unit, it decreases. Consumption is decreases. Of all other commodities remain, but all other commodities remaining the same. For example, if a person is hungry, the first roti he consumes will have high utility for him, as it will give him high level of satisfaction. As he keeps on consuming more and more roti, utility derived from each successive unit will go on decreasing. After a point of time, when person is satisfied, he will not be able to eat more. The utility will drop to zero here. If the consumption of roti is continued further, a person would get negative utility or disutility. This means after first is give him more satisfaction. Then second is decrease, so some amount decrease, and third like that some point is arise, some point is come where the consumer is not like to take, will not able to take any more commodity, more of that commodity. So that time say want to the utility drop to zero, and after it consume again the the units of that good, then the person will get negative utility or feel some kind of problem. This can also be described through a diagram. In page 96, we see a schedule, diminishing marginal utility schedule. In this schedule, one roti give him marginality 10. Then two, in case 2 units of roti give him 8. Like that, this is one is decreasing in nature. In 5, it is 0. That means after that, it has a negative utility for the person. So, base of this schedule, when you draw a diagram of the marginal utility, we get it sloping downward to the right, and it is in touch the o-axis. After that also it continues in the case of negative, and when it starts after 5 unit, it starts to negative utility. But this law is, we know that all the commodities have this type of diminishing marginality, get diminishing marginal utility. But in case of some cases, there is exceptional cases where this law is not applied. Like small initial unit, when the unit is initial, small first unit is initial, then there it is not working. Like if you thirsty, then you want to drink a glass of water, but if you get only 1 spoon of water, then what happen? This is a small initial, but your requirement is a glass of water, but we got only a spoon of water. Means that is here, that is not diminishing, because in second unit we bring more and more. Then it is increasing in nature. So it is only after a stage, and so that in small initial unit it cannot be worked. So it is only after a stage in consumption is reached that marginal utility begins to diminish. It takes so many units to get a satisfaction for the satisfaction, and after that it can diminishing. Then in rare collections also this law is not applied. The law does not apply in such cases because a collection of more and more units usually give more satisfaction to the collector. So that in this rare collection, this law is not applied. Then discontinuous consumption also, this law is not applied. Continuous consumption means if you take so minutes, then after a break you want to take, then this is not also give the diminishing marginal utility. So in this continuous consumption also it is not applied. Then money also is important thing, where money acceptable by everyone, and it is a stock of goods. Money can be exchanged, all the goods can be exchangeable by money, so that after then what you collect money more and more, that never give you the diminishing marginal utility. Then criticism of this theory. Why this law is criticized? Most of the economists, most of modern economists criticize this law. First, measurement of utility is not possible. Here, utility, we know that utility is a psychological phenomenon, it is mentally case. Then how can we measure it cardinally? So in real life, it cannot be measured in quantitatively. So this is criticized by many various economists. Then marginal utility of money does not remain constant. We know that marginal, if you in cardinal economists believe that marginal utility of money remains constant throughout the law. But however, when a person uses money, stock of money can be reduces, which means the to increase in utility of remaining stock. So that at that case, the marginal utility is increasing for him. Utility is not always independent. In Marshall economists are sure that utility is independent in nature, but consumer prefers to consume series of related goods. A consumer may prefer to consume biscuits or pakoda along with tea, and so the utility of one commodity is not independent always. It is dependent on any other commodities. Then are unrealistic assumption. Here also some assumptions are given by this theory are, but they are unrealistic in nature. First, it assumes no change in fashion, taste, income, preference of customer. But in real life, there is nothing is constant. With environment is extremely dynamic, yet so the taste fashion also changeable. So that this is also an unrealistic assumption. When new products are coming to the markets, they have advanced features. Because of that, the consumer state preference can be also changed, and which means which the Marcel which describe the constant of taste, preference, income is not possible. But in real life, there is nothing is constant. So that this law may not operate in present dynamic times, at least not in the same form it was believed to operate. And it is operating century ago, but nowadays it is not possible to apply in this economy. Then consumer equilibrium through utility analysis. We know that consumers' nature is what? Consumer is wants maximum satisfaction of the commodity. So how he derived equilibrium in this situation from the law, it is very important. A consumer is considered to be extremely satisfied when he allocates his income in such a way that the last rupee spent on each commodity gives the same level of utility. He distributes his income like that way, he gets maximum satisfaction, and last rupee spent on each commodity, he gets the same level of utility. The utility of both combination of goods is equal. The concept of this type of concept of consumer equilibrium can be known as the multi-commodity model or equimarginal utility. This theory also based on the some assumptions. First, consumer is rational, means he is basic of the law. Consumer is rational. He measures, compares, chooses the bin the best option in order to maximize its utility. And he always, a consumer wants always a maximum satisfaction. Because of this, he always compares, measures, and chooses the best option for him. Then cardinal measurement of utility. Here also the utility in measuring cardinally. Marginal utility of money is constant. In third, marginal utility of money is constant. It assumes that utility measured in terms of money and utility of money does not change. It is always constant. For fixed income and prices, the economist here also it is assumed that income of the consumer is constant. It is not changed, and the prices of goods also remain constant. Then constant taste and preference, and also the consumer's taste and preference is not also change. It is also remain same. It cannot be changed time to time. Then sixth, diminishing marginal utility, and here also the commodity is face the margin commodity marginal utility face the diminishing in nature. Then how the consumer equilibrium derived. In the case of one commodity case, how equilibrium is derived. In page 98, we saw you can see a diagram. Here, the equilibrium is derived in one commodity case. Suppose a consumer with fixed income consumes a single commodity X. Here, the consumer consumes only a single commodity X. He will continue his consumption till a point where marginal utility that he derived from the consumption of a unit of commodity greater than marginal utility of money spent on purchasing that unit. Means the consumer is consumed that level of the commodity, where he get the marginal utility of that good is equal with the price utility of that. What is purchasing utility of that unit? If the marginal utility of the commodity is X is MUX is greater than the marginal utility of money, then the consumer will exchange the money for a commodity. Till the point he cannot give up when it is equilibrium, or when marginal utility of X is equal to marginal utility of price, or marginal utility of X equal to PX. If MUX is, and then a consumer will exchange the money for a commodity. Consumer will keep on consuming and spending the money so long as MUX is more than PX. That level, the consumer is consuming the good. Where PX is the price of a commodity X is equal with the marginal utility, then that time he got a equilibrium point, and it is constant. In this diagram, we see that in the equilibrium, PX is the price of the X good, and MUX the marginal utility of X. And in OXS, there is units quantity of goods are shown, and OY axis we saw price and marginal utility of X. And the consumer wants to buy a good X costing rupees 10. Suppose the good X costing is 10 rupees. Marginal utility derived from each successive unit. And then it is when in this schedule you can see that in 1, 2, 3, 4 these units give him the maximum marginal utility, and which is more than the price. Then if in 4 unit, when it take the 4 unit, it get that At that point, marginal utility X is equal to the price of X. And after that, if he consuming that and paid for this good or want to try to purchase this goods, then it is loss for him. And that time, when it is get their MUX is the PX, after that he never buy this product because it give him the negative utility. In case of the one in single good, one commodity case, it is shown. But in real life, never you see the single commodity is unrealistic. This model is unrealistic in the real life. Then consumer consumes a large number of commodity. Nowadays, there are many combinations are present which the consumer want to purchase or want to take. This model deals with the equilibrium in case of many commodities. This model works under the assumption of limited income of the consumer and diminishing marginal utility of commodities. So, in this case, the main theme is the marginal utility of the X. Thus, when you calculate consumer equilibrium in multi-commodity case, this is called as the law of EQ marginal utility. Here, utility maximizing, consumer will first spend money on commodity which yield highest utility, then the second highest, and so on. Finally, the consumer will reach equilibrium when the last rupee spent on different commodities will give him equal level of utility. As usual, when it is equal, that time he leave the both different commodity will when give him equal level of utility. That time it is EQ marginal utility. A consumer having choices of multiple goods distribute their limited income in such a way that the last rupee spent on each commodity yields equal marginal utility. That means the consumer always wants the commodity which give him more utility, and as usual it is continued. If there is more commodities, first it consume that good, but consumer choice that good which give him more marginal utility, then can prepare the second good which give him less utility. Suppose a consumer consumes only two goods, X and Y. Thus, he will try to maximum his utility by equating his marginal utility and price. We know that whenever MUX equal to PX, that time he got to get the maximum satisfaction. It is its equilibrium point. Like that, MUX equal to PX, and there is two goods, multiple goods. Then there first MUX, marginal utility of X equal to price of X. Then marginal utility of Y equal to price of Y. Then the equilibrium point is derived when marginal utility of X by price of X equal to marginal utility of Y by price of Y. Because MU of each unit of money is assumed to be constant at 1. Two commodity case can be generalized for multi-commodity case also. And it multi-commodity case like that, MUX by PX equal to MUY by PY equal to MUC by PC, and like this way MUZ by PZ. All this ratio of the marginal utility of that good with price is equal with the marginal utility of the other good and its price. Then can you get the maximum point, and which is the equilibrium point. In the page 100, you see one diagram is which is shows you equilibrium EQ marginal utility. In there is 5 rupees. A customer, suppose the total money income of a consumer is only 5 rupees. He wants to spend on two goods, X and Y. Both these good commodities are priced ₹1 per unit. Both have 1 rupees per unit. And From we know that if he consume first unit purchase first unit of the X good, it derived marginal utility equal to 12. And second unit, if he buys purchase second unit, he derived the marginal utility 10 utils, and third unit it derived 8 utils of X good. Like this way, the in 4 it derived 6 utils of marginal utility. In 5 units it it take the it derived 4 utils of the marginal utility. Like this way, then marginal utility also derived the good Y. In where it purchased 1 unit of the good Y, it derived marginal utility 9, and 2 unit of 2 units in good Y, then it get 8 units of marginal utils of marginal utility, and 3 units it get 6 utils of marginal utility in case of good Y. Like this way, then here you see that in third rupee will be spent on commodity Y to get utility of 9 in utils. Fourth is 8. If the consumer wants to purchase all the commodity, spend all the money for one commodity, it not satisfied, because he wants to choose a combination which give him maximum satisfaction. At that time, he invest his units money in 3 units of good X and 2 units of good Y. Here, third unit of good X is equal to the 2 units of good Y. Here, the consumer is get maximum satisfaction and get equilibrium point. In the diagram, you see that E is the equilibrium point. MU of last rupees spent on each commodity is same. We know that the condition of equivalent utility, in this case, the MU of last rupees spent on each commodity is same. Here, when the 3 minutes of 3 rupees is consuming in X good, marginal utility is 8, and in the 2 units or 2 rupees spent on the good Y, its marginal utility 8. So that in third of X good and second of the Y good is same. MU falls as consumption increase. We know that many consumption when increases, consumption is increases, MU also marginal utility falls. So that when consumer buys 3 units of X and 2 units of Y, it is the preferable combination for his and which give him maximum satisfaction for the consumer. MU from last rupee, 5th rupee spent on commodity Y gives the same satisfaction of 8 units of H given by the last rupee, 4th rupee spent on commodity S. 4th rupees of X is equal to the 5th rupees of Y. MU of each commodity falls as consumption increases. So the total satisfaction of the consumer is 47. When you add all these combination 12, 10, 8, 9 and 8, we get that total satisfaction is 47. When consumer buys 3 units of X and 2 units of Y, he get maximum satisfaction and maximum utils. It reflects the state of consumer's equilibrium. So it is the state of equilibrium. If the consumer spends his income in any order, that total satisfaction will be less than 47 utils. So in this case, this is the Marshallian law of equimarginal utility. Here we find the multiple, in the case of multi-commodity case, that then he always consumer wants to spend his rupees on this way, that MU of last rupees spent on each commodity is same. This way you can find that the equilibrium point is E. He get here maximum utils of the commodity. Then Marshall, and this is Marshallian theory. Then how can it derive the demand curve through the help of the diminishing marginal utility? We know that demand curve is sloping downward to the right. So here demand curve or law of demand shows the relationship between price of good. The law of demand what you show price and good, and here is price and good among between them is negative relation or inversely they are related each other. Marshall derived the demand curves for goods from their utility function also. Now Marshall was the first person who derived goods demand curve. Marshall assumed the utility functions of different goods to be independent of each other. Marshallian technique of deriving demand curves for goods from their utility function rests on the hypothesis of additive utility. Means when you add this utility, then can you find the demand curve. It is the economist Marshall can assume this theory. The law of diminishing marginal utility states that as the consumer purchases more and more units of a commodity, utility that it derives from successive units goes and decreases. Here we know that what is law of diminishing says, the law of diminishing states that when you purchase more and more units of a particular commodity, you get the less, our utility is decreasing in nature, and this is law of diminishing marginal utility. A rational consumer who measures, compares, and can work while purchasing a commodity compares the price of the commodity which he has to pay with the utility, the service from it. Always a rational consumer, what can do? What he doing? He is always wants that the what he spent on the commodity it is equal, or what he gets the utility is more than the price. If the utility is less than price, it never can be spent his purchasing his money. So long as the marginal utility of a commodity is higher than its price, the consumer would spend more and more. After that, when the marginal utility is equal with the price, then he stopped to consume the good. And we know that in equilibrium condition also, marginal utility of a good equal to the price of the good. So a consumer is always rational, and he compares his price with the utility. As price is as when he purchase any commodity, he compare with the price. As the marginal utility of that commodity is more than the price he spent, then automatically what happens? Then that time, then more and more units can be he purchased. After when marginal utility equal to price, at that time he stopped to purchase the or take the more unit of that particular good. That is the equilibrium condition is established. In other words or other meanings, the consumer consume more and more units of a commodity. Its marginal utility goes on diminishing. Marginal utility always diminishing in nature. It is more and more is consumed. That means it give you it utility is decreasing in nature. So it is only at a diminishing price at which the consumer would like to demand more and more units of a commodity. When price decreases, we know that quantity demanded increases when price is decreasing, then can quantity demanded increases. So the demand curve is derived through the law of diminishing marginal utility. We saw a diagram here in 102 page. In the left side diagram, we saw that this is the marginal utility curve of X good. Here we said that when the consumer consume X1 goods, he get highest marginal utility, which is MU1. And when it consumes X2 quantity of the commodity, he get the MU2 of the MU2 marginal utility. In case of X3, he also get MU3 marginal utility, which is diminishing in nature. Many more and more units of quantity he take, then he get less decreasing marginal utility. To cover it, the next in the right side diagram, because of that you draw a demand curve. At x1 quantity of the marginal utility of a good is MY. This is equal to P1. And when the x2 quantity of consume, the marginal utility is MU2 and the price is P2. And when the consumer consumes X3, he gets the marginal utility MU3 and the price is P3. And when P1, P2, P3, the points of are intersected or adjoining, we get them the PX curve, which is the demand curve. And if at P3 the consumer buy OX3 quantity and so on, it can be concluded that the units of commodity increases when the prices decreases, the units of commodity to consume it increases. This way, a demand curve is drawn through the diminishing marginal utility. So, at diminishing price, the quantity demanded of good X increases. The rational consumer can be downsloping demand curve that when price falls, other things remaining the same. The quantity demanded of a good increases and also like that. When as usual, when prices decreases, quantity demanded increases. If the prices increases, the quantity demanded decreases. As from this marginal utility or diminishing marginal utility curve through the demand curve is drawn. The quantity demanded of a good increases. It is the law of demand. In the case of marginal utility, also this same thing is happened. In marginal utility, what happened? It is diminishing in nature. Like that, in law of demand also, as usual, price decreases, quantity demanded increases, and quantity demanded when price increases, quantity demanded decreases. In this way, with this marginal utility, diminishing marginal utility curve, we can draw the demand curve of the good. Then come to a next. What is consumer surplus? Now, a question arises that how, in which period the consumer gets surplus, means more quantity of good. This one is drawn. The concept of consumer surplus was first formulated by French engineer Erken Julius Dupit in 1844 in case of to measure the social benefits of public goods such as canals, bridges, national highways, like that. Means the first engineer is derived in who engineer is describe this consumer surplus thing. Then after that, Marshall defined it theoretical defined it in his books in 1890 Principle of Economics. In the case of this, what is consumer surplus? Marshall's concept of consumer surplus was based on the cardinal measurability and interpersonal comparisons. Utility. According to him, consumer surplus is the difference between what one is willing to pay and what one actually pays, and for a particular good. Here, the concept is depend on the willing to pay and what is actually paid. When concept of consumer surplus is a very important concept for economic theory, especially for the welfare economies of the government. It is also a very useful in formation of economic policies such as taxation by the government. In the consumer surplus, the concept of consumer surplus is derived from the law of diminishing marginal utility. As we purchase more units of goods, its marginal utility goes on diminishing. It is because of the diminishing marginal utility that a consumer's willingness to pay for additional units of commodity declines as he has more units of the commodity. We know that it is possible to marginal. What happens in marginal utility? When there is much more stock of the particular commodity, then automatically marginal utility of that good is decreases in nature, declines in nature. The measurement of consumer surplus from a commodity from the demand or marginal utility curve is described in the on a diagram. 100 page 103. Here is a diagram. That is, in this diagram, we saw that OX and OY. OX is the quantity and OY is the price and marginal utility. D is the demand and also marginal utility curve, which is sloping downward and which indicate that as the consumer buys more units of the commodity, marginal utility derived from the additional unit of the commodity falls or decreasing. If OP is the price that prevails in the market, then the consumer will be in equilibrium when buys OM. And equilibrium point is S. At the point S, he buys OM quantity and of the good and OP is its price. OM units of marginal utility from a unit of the commodity equal to the price of OP. The mth unit of the commodity does not add any consumer surplus. In the case of the mth unit of the consumer surplus, consumers does not give him consumer surplus. Before that, consumer, since this is last unit purchased and for this price paid is equal to the marginal utility. Here OM equal to OP. That means marginal utility of this quantity is equal to the price of the quantity. So that here the consumer is get maximum satisfaction or equilibrium point. But for the units of before mth point, what happened? Before the point, marginal utility is greater than the price, and therefore these units are a consumer surplus to the consumer. The total utility of certain quantity of commodity to a consumer can be known by summing up the marginal utility of the various units purchased. In figure 5, in this diagram, we see that total utility derived by the consumer from OM units of the commodity will be equal to OPSM. Area marginal curve up to the point M, that is the total utility of OM units is equal to ODSM. In other words, for OM units of the good, the consumer will prepare to pay the sum equal to rupees ODSM. But given the price equal to OP, the consumer will actually pay OPSM, which is less than the willing to pay. Means the consumer wants to pay for the mth units, the consumer wants to pay ODSM amount of rupees, but in the price level OP, he actually paid OPSM. ODMSM is more than the OPSM. So that in this diagram, we saw that DPS is the consumer surplus. It is thus clear that consumer derives extra utility, which is equal to the DPS. When we minus this DOMS minus POMS, then we get that DPS, which is extra amount of utility, which is surplus utility for the consumer. If market price of the commodity rises above OP, then the consumer will buy fewer units of the commodity than OM. As a result, consumer surplus obtained by him from his purchase will decline. At the time, if the market prices increases to OP2 above P, then whatever the quantity decreases, which give him small amount of consumer surplus. On the other hand, if price falls below 2 OP, then below 2 OP, the consumer will be in equilibrium when he is purchasing more units of the commodity than OM. As a result of this, the consumer surplus will increase.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes?
So if we keep aside this diagram, consumer surplus is basically like since the consumer is having more of a particular commodity, so he will be willing to pay less for that commodity.
Yes.
So in that case, the consumer surplus arises.
Hmm. He willing he willing to pay more, but actually payment is less, which is extra. Which when we minus the willing to pay to, but actually paid, we get the surplus, consumer surplus. That means one thing's rate is, think about, suppose one thing rate is, price is 100, but he that goods utility much more, so that the people is its consumer surplus. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Thus, given the marginal utility curve of the consumer, the higher the price, the smaller the consumer surplus, and the lower is the price, the greater the consumer surplus. So, from the above, we know that the higher is the price, the less is the consumer surplus, and the lower is the price, then the more is the consumer surplus. So, a consumer surplus, the concept of consumer surplus is very important for the government, for the taxation purposes, for the other things like the social welfare economics, like the social, for the social goods. It is very important concept for the economy. Then you now we know about the what is law of diminishing marginal utility, what is equimarginal utility. Then in which case it is got the equilibrium point. Then now the theory is, but some problems or some analysis, some things are there which is criticized by a modern economist. So because of the cardinal utility, this economy is criticized many of the modern economists. It, this is best for the Marshallian cardinal utilization. Cardinal utilities mostly described by the Marshall. So this theory is criticized by the some modern economists. First, cardinal measurement of utility is impracticable. That means cardinal measurement is not possible. How can we calculate it is in quantitative basis? Because utility is a psychological phenomenon. It is a mental thing. Then subjectively, it is different from each person to each person. Then it is very, and it is a subjective feeling. It cannot be measured in quantitative terms. So this one is criticized. This law is criticized by mainly the economists Hicks and Allen. And after that, they can describe a new theory which is called ordinal utility. And next class we also know about this theory. And here the modern economists describe that it is unrealistic. The measurability of utility in cardinally, it is very unrealistic theory. Then wrong assumption of independent utilities. Here, the economic Marshall described that all the commodities, various goods are independent in nature. Their cardinal utility are independent in nature. This means that the utility which a consumer derives from a good is a function of the quantity of that good only. Means the assumption of independent utility which implies that the utility which a consumer obtains from a good does not depend upon the quantity demanded of other goods. But in realistic that is not happen. In actual life, the utility or satisfaction derived from a good depends upon the availability of some other goods which may be either substitutes or complementary goods. So that it is also a unrealistic assumptions. And assumption of constant marginal utility of money is not true. It is how can we tell that marginal utility of money is constant? All things marginal utility in diminishing nature. Then how it is possible that marginal utility of money is constant? When a consumer spends varying amount of good or various goods or when the price of a good changes, marginal utility remains money constant. But in actual practice, this is not correct. As a consumer spends his money income on the goods, money income left with him declines. Now, when the money income declines, then available to the consumers, the marginal utility of remaining money also rises. So, constant marginal utility of money is not true. In cardinal utility analysis ignores the changes in real income also. It affects on demand for goods following the change in price of a good. He in this law also it is supposed that it is constant in price and income also, but actually like prices are fluctuated. So it is so that constant marginal utility of money, therefore the neglect of the income effect. Then cardinal utility analysis does not spell up the price effect into substitution and income effect. In real life, when the price of good falls, the consumer becomes better off than before. For that, a fall in price of good brings about an increase in the real income of the consumer. With this increased income, he would be in a better position to purchase good. Besides, when the price of a good falls, it becomes relatively cheaper than other goods, and as a can be decomposed into substitution effect and income effect. But Marshall cannot describe this thing, spelled out of this thing. Marshall could not explain Giffen paradox. The price effect is a combination of substitution and income effects, and ignoring the income effect the price change. Marshall could not explain the Giffen paradox. In contrast, it is a exceptional of his law of demand. So, in contrast to this, independent curve analysis has been able to explain satisfactorily the given goods. So, the given goods is easily and can be described in ordinal utility analysis of the independent curve analysis, which we study in the next day or tomorrow. So, according to independent curve analysis, in case of given paradox or the given good, negative income effect of the price change is more powerful than substitution effect. So that when the price of a given good falls, the negative income effect outweighs the substitution effect, and the result that quantity demanded of it falls. So that these are the criticism of this law which is criticized by the modern economics. So now We complete this chapter of consumers behavior in cardinal approach. Then any doubt?
one question कैसा था देगा
Some probable question we prepare for this blog. Write down. First, what is utility? What are the concepts of utility? Third question is, write the basic assumption of what is utility, what are the concepts of utility. Write the basic assumptions of preferences. Basic assumptions of preferences. SASSUNTTIONs. Then fourth, critically explain law of diminishing marginal utility. Utility. Five, explain equilibrium in multi-commodity case. Explain equilibrium in multi-commodity case. Commodity case. What is consumer surplus? Then next one, write briefly the criticism of cardinal utility analysis. Cardinal utility analysis, CARDINAL. Cardinal utility analysis. These are some probable questions. Some are short and some are long questions. Any questions? Any doubt?
No, ma'am. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yes?
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Now today's class is over. We will meet again in next class.